Someone asked me the other day, do you go by the righteousness which is of the law or the righteousness of faith? That false dichotomy is based upon an appalling doctrine. In the left column, we have what God actually said in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. In the right column, we have what Paul said in Romans chapter 10, verse 5, 6, 7, and 8. Paul attempts to quote God here, okay? But of course, you know what happens. In verse 5, Paul said, "For Moses writes about the righteousness which is of the law. Quote, the man who does those things shall live by them," unquote. The actual scripture, which is Leviticus 18, verse 5, says, God said, "You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which, if a man does, he shall live by them. I am the Lord." Okay, Paul, you misquoted it as usual, but we'll forgive you this time. But we see your logic, Paul. We see your logic. Because Moses wrote it, it is the righteousness which is of the law. Okay, so it's in the books of Moses, therefore it's the righteousness which is of the law. Okay, verse 6, the next verse. This is Romans chapter 10, verse 6. Paul said, "But the righteousness of faith speaks in this way," quote, "Do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven," unquote. That is to bring Christ down from above. The actual scripture says, God said, "It is not in heaven that you should say, who will ascend into heaven for us and bring it to us that we may hear it and do it." Of course, Paul leaves out the whole entire thing about doing it, and he just quotes part of the verse. Typical. And he does the same thing in verse 7 and in verse 8, because he attempts to quote Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 13 and 14. You can pause this video to check it yourself. So Paul clearly implies, well, Moses wrote it. Moses wrote the law. Therefore, the righteousness that he wrote about is the righteousness which is of the law. Okay, perfect. Thumbs up to you, Paul, on that one. Makes perfect sense. So then, the righteousness which is of faith, if it's opposed to the righteousness which is of the law, the righteousness of faith would not be based in the law, right? If the righteousness of faith clashes with the righteousness which is of the law, the righteousness of faith would certainly not be found in the Torah, right? If the righteousness of faith is antithetical to that of the righteousness of the law, it certainly wouldn't be found in the law, right? But in Romans 10, verse 6, Paul's talking about the righteousness of faith, and he gets that doctrine from the law. He gets it from the law. But somebody will say, well, there's two different kinds of righteousness. Sorry, God is not a double-standard, double-minded, hypocritical psycho. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, one standard of righteousness defined by one law.